Hey everybody, welcome back to Dad Talk. Today I am sitting here with Kelly Patterson. How you doing today, Kelly?
Pretty good, hi.
Yeah, Kelly is the author of a book, From Trafficked to Treasured.
Yes.
Could you tell everybody a little bit about what that's about?
Sure. From Trafficked to Treasured is my life story of having been sex trafficked in South Dakota and also surrounding states, and what's not in my book is eventually out of the country as well. I'm kind of thinking about a part 2 of the book. This is the PG version.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you, one of the things that was really concerning to many people is that you were brought up in a good middle-class family, but nobody knew what was going on.
Right.
Can you explain a little bit more about that?
And that is concerning to people to hear, but it's better that we know that this happens than to go on living with our eyes closed.
Right.
Middle income family, middle America, small town USA. Everybody knows everybody, and so everybody trusts everybody. Nobody locked their doors. It was that kind of a life, and so it all began in a very small community.
Right.
And someone that knew my family.
Yeah. So it was somebody that you knew.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Kelly, I know a lot of times when people go through trauma like this in these situations, they don't speak out about it right away. How old were you when you very first started to come out with that?
So there wasn't really a term for it. It was not quite 20 years ago. I started running support groups for survivors of any kind of sexual trauma, and I didn't know what to call what had happened to me, so I would just introduce myself to the groups as, oh, I'm the queen of having repeat offenders, you know, things like that. I didn't know what to call it. And I would find many of the people in the groups would have that same story. And it wasn't until I started hearing the term trafficking that I began to be able to put a label to what had happened to me.
Gotcha. What were some of the emotions and feelings attached with that? I know sometimes there can be guilt, embarrassment, and there's many different things. What was that like for you in carrying that all those years?
All of that. One of the ones that surprised me was shame, because I also walked around with not much emotion, afraid of any emotion, and I think that was my fear of if I let a little emotion out, a whole bunch would spill out.
Right.
So
you built walls around yourself?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I walked around in a lot of numbness, and like I didn't feel anger or, you know, any of that really. But shame, apparently, unknown to me, was very visible. And actually I got called out on it, and that's what caused me to begin working with other survivors about, like I said, maybe 18 years ago or so, is being called out on the shame.
So anyway, Eric had to walk off for just a minute here, but when you talked about the numbness, was there any type of self-medication involved, or alcohol, or drugs? I mean, the numbness, is that just a wall that you built up, or was there some other ways that you kind of took some measures, maybe even unknown to yourself, to protect yourself?
Yeah, I did drink very early on as a teenager to deal with what was going on, and I would drink to black out. And anyone knows that blacking out isn't fun. There's nothing to be remembered about it.
Right.
Why would you black out every time you drink except that you're escaping?
Right.
And that was a hint to myself that something was wrong, but again, I didn't have any training to understand how I should feel or what I was going through. And a few years later, I started getting into some drugs, but they began to really, the ring, I was trafficked by a ring, which is a criminal organization, and they began to force feed drugs to me, and that probably, I believe they were trying to get me addicted, but it helped me escape.
Got it.
And if I can't fathom going through it without drugs, to be frank.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was the healing process like, and about what age were you before you really started to process all this stuff that happened to you as a child?
I believe it was around my mid-30s is when I began to process. And that's kind of young. I seem to run into most hit that around 40s. But I'm sure that was because I was meant to help others. I feel like that's why.
You're turning your pain into purpose.
There you go.
Yeah. And I love that. And that's, you know, when we experience these things in life, I believe everything happens for a reason. Even though it's so tragic, there's no telling how many lives that you will be touching by speaking out.
Right.
And I believe there's power in being victims of circumstances like this and empowering others to say it's okay.
Yeah.
Because we need to really, you know, help other people process those feelings, because you know what it was like. I know what it was like. You know, it's a hard thing to talk about at times.
It is, and the shame keeps you so silent for so long. Even when I first started coming out, just around other females, I had horrible shame. And the deeper the conversation, the bigger the issues. I'm thinking of, in particular, part of what ring traffickers use as punishment is gang rape. And being able to actually say that term took me forever. I couldn't say that because I had so many things fed in my brain what that meant. It only happens to a certain kind of person and things like that. And that was stuck in my brain so hard that the shame made it, I didn't want to tell anyone.
So when this first started happening, you know, you brought up in the family, you didn't tell anybody. I mean, there must have been some other factors at play that you didn't perhaps confide in one or both of your parents. And in particular, along with that, could you tell me a little bit more about your relationship with your parents, how close it was, both your mother and your father?
Sure. I was very close to my mother. Very close to my mother, very protective of my mother. She had different health issues when I was young, and just other things where I felt like I wanted to protect her. My dad and I were not close at all.
Was there a reason for that?
Not that I know of, but they got married very young, and I think he was immature. I know he was. And they were partiers at the time. They weren't super conservative. They were conservative in their voting, but they weren't necessarily conservative in their living of their life at that time. And then my dad was in a plane wreck when I was in what grade? 5th grade.
Okay.
And that plane wreck caused brain injury, and that took a lot of years for him to come back.
Got it.
I didn't want to bring anything else into the family.
So let me ask you then, because I know you've worked with a lot of people, is this a common theme, perhaps, the relationship between you and your dad, you said, was not as close as it could have been, for various reasons. That's not, you know, judgmental or anything like that. But do you see that to be a common factor a lot of times?
I think it certainly makes you a target because you're looking for that daddy affection. And I seem to run into it all the time, where there's one or both parents are out of the picture, or they're just uninvolved or uncaring. And I think it does. You know, you're hungry for that. And unfortunately, these perpetrators see that. They just pick up on it and read it.
So the perpetrators, you talked about the ring and stuff like that. How pervasive are the ring's activities? So for example, I mean, you're talking about specifically sex trafficking. I think about things, you know, okay, what about, I think that their tentacles are probably in a lot of other things that maybe seem more, you know, not saying innocuous, but in a sense, I thought you said at one point in time that they had pictures of you as an exotic dancer and stuff like that. And maybe I'm mistaken.
Well, there's a lot of film I hope to never see come out. Because I didn't even mention when I spoke earlier, I have 19 memories of being in big production films. I don't know if there were more. Those are the ones I have clearly. Along with that, what you might have heard me talk about is there was a head of a nation that used film of me with some heads of other nations to blackmail them into financial deals with his country.
So this, I'm going to tell you. I mean, somebody listening to this is going to say this is incredible. Maybe it really didn't happen, but and I'm not. You know, this is what the response is going to be, because you're talking about heads of nations talking with you right now. So I mean, is yours? You had a strong degree of this happening, but the idea that you're talking about here, is this uncommon, or is it more common than we even imagine?
I have a feeling it's much more common than we imagine. I wasn't the only girl in that particular president's home, for one thing.
Okay.
So I hate to think how common it actually might be, quite frankly. And I have talked to enough, I'll just be frank, CIA agents around the nation to know that what I'm talking about with ring trafficking is something they know very well. It's not a surprise to them.
Right.
I've had a couple of them even know of me before I knew of them.
Wow.
So
do you mind if I ask, I know, Eric, you probably have another question here, but what about the idea of, maybe you've done some research, foster care? Because I've talked with the U.S. Agency Against Human Trafficking, and their statistic is that at least about 70% of the people that are involved in some type of trafficking come from a foster care environment. I've heard similar statistics, or maybe even higher at times, regarding CPS. And I don't know if you can speak to that issue or not, because, you know, these governments will say, well, we're going to put them in foster care to help them out. And what they're doing is they're creating people that are more vulnerable to be trafficked. And in many instances, they are trafficked. I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
I work with survivors. We have an organization called Treasured Lives. So we work with survivors, and I have run into a number that have been through the foster care system and were trafficked in a way that we would refer to as familial trafficking. Kind of, I don't want to call it low level, but as in the family they're with, traffic them for different things. Sometimes it was to pay rent, or for a pack of cigarettes, or it was for money and they were connected to other traffickers.
I can't even imagine that, but I've been hearing more and more about that too. Eric?
Yes, Kelly, if there was anybody else that was experiencing any problems similar to what you were going through, or maybe they are now, what is some advice you could give to them?
So let me talk to two different individuals there. One would be, first I want to address someone who is currently being trafficked. And then secondly, address someone who has recently gotten out, or maybe they've never gotten help. So to the one who is being trafficked, don't give up. You can do it again. There are people that see you, and there are people that are waiting for you. You just need to find them and try and try and try until you get out alive. I hope life for you. For those that are out, but you haven't gotten any help and you feel hopeless and you feel maybe still full of shame and where's life going for you, I'm here to tell you, you can live, you can thrive. You don't have to necessarily do what I'm doing and help other people, but you can live, and you can live a good life. Just find others, find survivors. You can find them all over the internet. Find them in your community and join hands.
So Kelly, you mentioned that earlier, you mentioned about the longevity of people that are trafficked. What is the longevity of their lives? Because you're talking about life right now.
Right.
And what is a typical lifespan?
The FBI statistic is 7 years. Is the average lifespans for someone being sex trafficked. Sex trafficking is so hard on your body and your soul. It just crushes you. And then the other statistic that we hear quite a bit is between 1% and 2% that ever escape alive. So I can't think of anything besides abortion that takes more lives than sex trafficking.
Wow, that's amazing. The people, I have met a couple of people that have come out of the sex trafficking, and what has always astounded me is how they can live right now with joy. I don't know how do they live. They've never really said how do they deal with memories, but I've seen these people. They've been trying, you know, they're survivors, but they're also triumphant, and you're like, how do you put these two things together?
I have found the same thing. I love hanging out with other survivors.
Yeah.
Because we're just so grateful to be alive and to be anywhere.
Yeah.
And to be free. And you don't take any of your freedoms for granted. When you have had all of your freedom stolen.
Yeah.
Like, I still will go, I get to own my own phone.
Yeah.
Or I get to go shopping when I feel like it. But I don't have to go shopping if I don't want to. I get to pick out what I want to wear.
Yeah.
All of those things that we take for granted, you know, now were something I didn't have.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you do see that joy, but also there is a hope and a joy. So many survivors are Christians, they're believers.
Right.
Because our hope is in God. And and when we get out, what was the phrase you said about purpose?
Turn your pain into purpose.
Turn your pain into purpose. And I always say, if I've got to suffer something, then let me turn it around and use it for good, or it serves no purpose.
Yeah.
And then it's just wasted suffering.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that from Traffic to Treasure, learning to process those feelings, you know, and become, you know, someone that can help other people through this pain. But Kelly, tell everybody a little bit about where they can find your book.
Okay. You can get my book on Amazon. You can also order it from any bookstore, really. But Amazon's probably the quickest and the easiest. And it's From Trafficked to Treasured. I may do a part 2, and then also I have been told that I can announce that there will be a film and possibly a TV series as well on my life. Because there's a whole lot more to the story than what's in that book.
Yeah, and I'm sure, well, it is a privilege to meet you. And, you know, we're so grateful that you are using that which was meant for evil, for good, to save many people.
That's my favorite from Joseph. That's my favorite
Genesis
saying.
50, verse 20. Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. It was
you.
so nice to meet you. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back.